All right. So we'll get started, and I'll keep an eye on the list to see if there's anyone if the other folks are able to join us. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. We're very excited for today's webinar. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to the folks at Pulsar Security to teach us all about security during this time, which has been a hot topic even with Zoom, right? We've done the things that we can to try and make this as secure for our participants as possible, but I'm sure we're all going to learn a lot today. So thank you for being here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks a lot, Kate. This is Jason with Pulsar Security. We really appreciate all of you coming and the opportunity to present and teach a little bit about some of the attack techniques that we're seeing in the world now with everyone quarantined at home, as well as some of the defenses that we recommend and some simple and straightforward steps that you can take to try to protect yourself and your fellow employees and your workforce overall. It's an absolutely beautiful day outside. So for the people who are here, I really appreciate you sitting down with us for a little bit. We'll try to get you out into the nice weather shortly. So let's get to it. Quick notes about who we are. I'm the Chief Operating Officer and a Senior Security Consultant here at Pulsar Security. We are a security services firm. We're in Londonderry, right over by the airport. I teach ethical hacking and penetration testing for the SANS Institute. I host a podcast called Trust Me, I'm Certified. That's about breaking into the information security industry and building your career and those kinds of things. And Ahren and I are also involved in a nonprofit in New Hampshire called TechRamp that is tasked with trying to help people transition into technical careers that haven't been there in the past. And then over here on the right, in this first picture, you can kind of see how my quarantine has been going so far. I just get beat up by my son every day. And then my daughter was actually born right before things started to lock down. So it was kind of nice timing. I appreciate that she came right before things started going a little bit crazy. So we also have Ahren on the presentation as well.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Kate and Jill and everybody else from the chamber for having us today. And thanks everybody for joining us. My name is Ahren Thielker. I'm a network security engineer and a security consultant, both on the technical and the physical side. So I can help you out with things like vulnerability assessments, penetration tests, as well as recommendations on locks and camera placements and things along those lines. I have a couple of GX certifications regarding penetration testing, web apps, wireless, or Python coding, a few CompTIA certs, and I'm a certified ethical hacker. I'm actively working on Offensive Security's OSCP, so hopefully that'll be up there in the near future. A couple of times a year, then I have an opportunity to participate in basically a big capture the flag called Net Wars, and I've been lucky enough to walk away on top of those a couple of times. As Jason mentioned, then I'm also one of the founding officers of our nonprofit TechRamp, and I'm an organizer of B-Sides New Hampshire, which unfortunately has been postponed a bit this year due to the pandemic situation. Hopefully we'll have some good news about in the coming months. Off to the right here is a photo of my wife, my son, and myself a few years back at Universal Orlando over at the Wizarding World of Harry Potter. You see my son there, although it's not quite a hoodie, he's working on the hacker uniform. So. So let's get started. Let's talk a little bit about some of the kinds of attacks that we've seen both before and during the pandemic. So most of the time, these attacks are going to be perpetrated by some sort of organized crime. There are financial motives behind it. So let's think about ransomware as an example. Basically, their goal is to get in, take all of the files in your system, encrypt them, and then hold them ransom for some kind of a payment. If it's against an individual, it could be in the hundreds of dollars. If it's a business, it could be in the thousands or tens of thousands of dollars worth of Bitcoin. But basically, they're just looking to hold all of your files ransom and find a way to gain financial benefit from it. We talk here about a business email compromise and it being more lucrative than a computer data breach. That's for a few reasons. But basically it boils down to the resources that the individual or the business has access to. as well as how likely they are to have a solid backup plan in place, and how likely they are to actually, pay it. If you have solid backups, you can just revert to a state before you were affected. But a lot of businesses and individuals find themselves in the position where they don't have that in place, and they truly do just have to pay the ransom in order to get their files back. There are a few different methods of compromise that you'll see, for many of these attacks, but in previous data breaches, then attackers are after things like usernames, like passwords, potentially social security numbers or credit card numbers, things along those lines. They're either looking to sell them for financial gain, or they could just be looking to throw that information out to the world. There are places both on the dark web and the surface web where you'll find these dumps, and you can find all sorts of information. One of the more useful ones from an attacker perspective is called a combo list, where it contains a combination username and password. So if people have been reusing usernames and passwords in multiple locations, then the attackers will have an entire list of potential combinations that they can just throw at as many services as possible, and see what actually logs in, and that's a great way in for the attackers.
No one reuses usernames and passwords across multiple services anymore, right? That's done.
Yeah, I wish that could be the case. Unfortunately, yeah, it's not. Another way in is phishing. That's with that PH there. I'm sure that you've all seen phishing attacks before, but basically, some attacker is going to be sending out an email either to an individual. It could be, a very targeted email. Like if they've, done their homework, they found out information about you, your company, or potentially your family. They could be, leveraging some of that information to try to get something from you directly. But it's not super common that an attacker would be, looking to target an individual. Generally, they're going to be casting a very wide net over an entire organization and simply trying to get, somebody within that organization to click on a link. Because once they have a foothold into an individual's computer, then they can potentially use that as a jumping off point to get into the rest of the network. So we talk here about the malware delivered via email. It looks like 94% has actually recently been delivered via email. So phishing is a super effective way of compromising a network. And part of that also goes back to the cat and mouse game between the attackers and the defenders. While technology is always advancing and the attackers are always finding new ways to break into things, there's always a human element that can be exploited. And again, if one of your users, anybody, clicks on that link, that could be a foothold in. So the language around those phishing emails, prior to the pandemic here, were generally either around, like individual needs, or it could have been like, your boss, or somebody pretending to be your boss reaching out and trying to get you to look at a document, before close of business. Usually there's some sense of urgency along with that to try to get you to bypass verifying it through other means and simply go through and, click the link.
New wire transfer account numbers are some of my favorites.
Yeah.
Where you see that with like home sales or big businesses that are, you're not going to send a check for a few $1 million or a few $100,000, but you might coordinate, hey, this is the account we're using for wire transfers. And then right before you're supposed to send it and close that big deal at the end of the quarter, you get an email that says there's a new account number. And then you update it and you send it to the new account number, and then the money's gone.
So, yeah, your entire down payment is just gone.
Yeah,
and the loan, and it's
right. Yeah, some of those ones are really, really sad because a big organization has the ability to, reach out to law enforcement and they just, pick it up a few weeks later when everything's handled. But, if you lose out on your closing date because your your transfer got phished, that can be a disaster for individuals. Right? It's much more difficult to recover from that.
So some of the language, post-pandemic around those phishing emails has basically just transferred to things around the coronavirus. It could be an email of you were in close proximity to somebody who has tested positive for coronavirus. Please click here for more information. Or it could be somebody pretending to be an insurance agent saying a claim has been denied, just hoping that you've been to the doctor recently. Again, click here for more information. And it could either be a fake form where they're just looking to gather personal information, or it could be delivering a malicious payload and allowing somebody to actually access your computer. But in the past a few weeks, we've seen the numbers go up drastically with the spam emails, phishing emails containing corona or COVID in the subject line. Lots of new domains popping up, lots of new IP addresses. So these attacks are coming from everywhere, and the attackers certainly are using the pandemic to their advantage. So many businesses, they didn't really anticipate the work from home orders. And that's if you're lucky enough to have a work from home opportunity. I know many folks are out of work entirely right now, but most of the or many businesses rather, they really had to rush to try to catch up and really get things under control. There are many ways for the individuals, for the remote resources to try to access like corporate resources. But unfortunately, because everything was so rushed, a lot of businesses have found themselves in a tough position, and they've done things improperly. They could be exposing communication protocols directly to the internet, or they could be allowing users through insecure home networks to do things that they really shouldn't be able to do. But with everything having expanded to work from home so quickly, we can think about it this way. The main corporate office is obviously the juicy resources for the attacker. All of the work from home employees are now essentially satellite offices. Because they're connecting into the corporate network, they are a jumping off point for those attackers to be able to actually get into the corporate network and reach more lucrative resources. And a lot of home networks really aren't as secure as corporate networks. You could have outdated hardware, outdated firmware, bad old devices, poor passwords, and a lot of that is overlooked as an individual because they think, why would somebody want to attack me? Like, what do I have to offer? But in this case, then you are a jumping off point out to corporate resources. And a lot of those, poor passwords, it's somewhat out of necessity. Like I know that if I had very, very complex passwords on all of my devices, then my wife wouldn't be happy every time she had to log into something at home. Or, and anytime you have a friend come, you could go through the trouble of setting up a guest network, but it's a complicated process. And a lot of people just don't want to tackle it. Basically what it boils down to is home networks are not as secure as corporate networks. So with the pandemic situation, attackers are now looking at these home networks as a jumping off point, and they're, again, taking advantage of that. So with accessing corporate resources, how do you move your workforce remote quickly? It's really easy to get it wrong. It happened quickly. And there are a lot of different ways of actually accessing information that you have in a corporate network. And the wrong way is, exposing those protocols directly to the public internet. There are ways, which we'll mention in a few slides, to do this securely, but unfortunately, there are some systems where it's insecure by default. So back in 2017, there was a big ransomware attack. It made worldwide news, called WannaCry, and it was again it was very widespread, just attacking computers left and right, and encrypting file systems, basically preventing everybody from doing any sort of work. The way that was accomplished was through a file sharing protocol called Server Message Block version 1, or SMBv1. And instead of locking that down to their local networks, or using a more current version of SMB, they just had it exposed directly to the public internet. And talking about that insecure by default configuration, by default, this was exposed in Windows XP and in Windows 7, I believe. So a lot of networks are still supporting those systems, and it's still a very big issue. We ran a search on a website called Shodan, which is basically a search engine for internet-connected devices. And we found, searching for SMB version 1 here, that there are still 1.4 million and change internet-connected devices that have SMBv1 exposed to the public internet. So they're still very much vulnerable to attacks in the style of WannaCry. We have a country-by-country breakdown, and it describes that the United States really is a very high number of exposed devices. So it's a juicy target for those attackers. And that's not to say that newer versions aren't completely impenetrable. Cryptos Logic here has been doing some research into the newer SMB versions, and they've been finding some vulnerabilities, but by and large a newer version is going to be more secure than an older version. So instead of exposing this directly to the public internet, how else could we go about fixing this? And that's going to bring us to Jason.
So Ahren talked a lot about connecting services directly to the internet. If people need to access file shares, or they need to print things at the corporate office, or administer servers if they're admins and those kinds of things, typically on the local network, you just connect right to whatever you need when you're in the office. But when you're remote, you need some way of connecting back in. And a lot of us who are working remotely are familiar with VPNs, or at least are now if you have to be remote. And that really is the better way to do it. This way you take a single service, your VPN service, and you connect that to the public internet, rather than exposing each of the services that people need to do their jobs. You just expose this one service. So it's a little bit easier to manage than having all kinds of services connected. It not only protects traffic from sniffing because it's encrypted, it's kind of like an encrypted tunnel that all of your traffic goes through, but it allows you to expose all of those services through a single connection, and rather than having a hole at the edge of your corporate network for each of them. And if you're a more mature organization, it is a great place to do more concentrated monitoring and securing of your network as well. But it can be annoying both for end users and people who have to manage these kinds of things, especially if you've had to implement it very quickly. Your ability to manage it at scale and securely might be diminished, as opposed to organizations that have been doing this for longer periods of time, or have had more expanded work from home workforces in the past before they were forced to. And it's also not foolproof, because VPN services have their own vulnerabilities. And if an attacker can compromise a user's account, maybe by even getting in through a personal email and then accessing a home network and then getting onto a machine where your VPN is configured and connected, then that attacker generally has the same level of access that the legitimate user has, doing things and using applications that aren't entirely discernible from what the normal user would do themselves. So it does present a few challenges as well, but by and large, this is the way that you want to do it. So Ahren mentioned that your home networks for work from home employees are really like satellite offices now, and that really is true. A few things that attackers might want to be able to do: they might want to phish users. Ahren did a pretty well explanation of phishing earlier in the presentation. They might be looking to just gather some of your credentials. So there's a page that maybe looks like a Facebook page or a corporate login page or something like that. But when you log into it, it takes your credentials and saves it somewhere that the attacker can view later, rather than actually logging you into the service. So you really do have to think, what is happening when I click this, and do I trust this place enough to want to click this submit link after I provide my credentials, or when I download this file, maybe they're trying to deliver ransomware or malware or something like that. If there's a general theme here, you have to be a little bit more skeptical of the places that you're going to and what you're providing to them. Even just visiting different pages is probably more dangerous than most people realize, but certainly providing any kind of information or downloading any files from lots of these sites is something you have to be really wary of. In Ahren's demonstration later in the presentation, we'll see some things that they can do once they do get access, like logging some of your keystrokes, as you type passwords or account numbers or things like that. Then they can pick those up via keylogger. Look at your screen, record audio and video. Even if you copy things off to the clipboard, like if you're somebody who's using a password manager and you copy passwords from the manager to like your bank website in your browser or something like that, if an attacker has access to your machine, then they can get some of those things off of the clipboard. You also have the networks themselves. So like your Wi-Fi network, not only the access points, like the physical devices themselves, but the configuration of the network. So there's a service called Wiggle, which is a little bit scary if you don't know about it ahead of time. But basically what it is, it's like Google Maps. But imagine if Google Maps had your Wi-Fi access point and the name of the wireless network overlaid for everyone's house and corporate network and all of those kinds of things. So even remotely from other areas of the world, you can go and find out what a likely home network might be or a likely corporate network might be. And from there, maybe that information is given to someone who has physical proximity to try to attack the network. If you are specifically someone that somebody might be trying to compromise rather than drive-by opportunistic type attacks, or maybe they're trying to attack your devices off in other places of the world when we're not quarantined and all staying at home, to try to mimic a network that is your home network. So maybe you're in Las Vegas and there's a hacking conference next door, and for some reason your phone connects to your home network, which is 3,000 miles away in New Hampshire. But yeah, there are tools and devices that make these kinds of things easy, and most people using the default password that they get from Comcast, or using their dog's name and sports team, like Tom Brady, Tampa Bay Bucks 12 or something like that. I think that no one's ever going to be able to guess it, but it's pretty easy to go on your social media profiles and see you like Tom Brady and you were a Patriots fan, but you're kind of liking the Bucks now that he transferred over. So it's an easy thing to just add to a list and say, let me try to log onto the network with this, or any of your web hosted service accounts, those kinds of things, right? So most people assume there's some anonymity in being in, one of the 7 point whatever billion people there are on the planet now. But really, if somebody starts to look at your organization or look at you, or even opportunistic things like your data being in a dump or something like that, it's a lot easier to do some of this stuff than it might seem. The good news that we'll see later in the presentation is that some of the defenses are pretty easy too. You just have to know some of what you're up against, or it's difficult to really come up with a strategy for defending them. So at the beginning of the presentation, we did preface, or Kate prefaced, that there have been some recent issues and maybe notoriety with Zoom being in the news. It's gotten a ton of usership with everyone being at home. It's kind of like, when hot tubs came out, jacuzzi decided, hey, we're going to corner the market and people are going to start saying jacuzzi when they really mean hot tub. That's kind of what Zoom has become. It's become the de facto thing that people are using to try to remote conference. And with that, there were some notable issues. Some of them were things like, people joining meetings they weren't supposed to be on, and saying and showing things that people don't want to see at these kinds of meetings. A lot of that, even though you don't want that to happen and you want the ability to prevent it from happening, but a lot of it happened because people were using applications that they didn't have experience with, that they didn't know how to configure, that they didn't know how to secure. And when people did get access to meetings, they didn't know how to kick them and they didn't know how to mute them. So a lot of that really was just lots of people using an application that they didn't have experience with. There were some reports after that, based on some work that some security researchers did to basically pick Zoom apart and try to see how it's doing what it's doing and whether or not there are more complex and technical vulnerabilities to be concerned about. And in full disclosure, there were some things that they found that, if an attacker got the right kind of position, like if you were in a Zoom meeting with an attacker that had knowledge of a certain vulnerability, they might be able to run some commands on your computer. And there was an exploit listed on the dark web over the last few weeks or so that would allow them to do exactly that. But I have no stake in Zoom. I don't, recommend it highly over any other video conferencing app. But my overall takeaway is that the findings and the issues that you see with Zoom aren't necessarily unique to Zoom. It's really that they are things that you'll find with any application that people start using in high numbers in a short time frame, or when researchers start picking apart an app that hasn't gotten a lot of attention in the past. So it's not necessarily just the presence of issues that you want to pay attention to. Microsoft Windows, for example, has issues all the time. And the reason is because so many people use it that it gets a ton of attention and it gets a ton of research behind potential issues. But they do a decent job of keeping up with them and fixing it and releasing patches and trying to stay on top of security issues. So that's really the thing that you want to pay attention to, not just with video conferencing, but any application that you're going to use regularly, and certainly any application that you're going to tell your workforce, hey, we're going to use this as a standard. You want to pay attention to how the developers and the organization that produces that application respond to security issues as they occur over time. Are they fixing them quickly? Are they paying attention to them? Are they trying to engage the community to get a better understanding of what some of the issues are? And if they're doing a decent job at those things, then you're probably pretty safe over time. But there are lots of examples of companies and applications that don't take that approach, and you should take your business elsewhere if you can. And even more than that, just make sure that you're taking the time to know how to use the products that you're using, especially for things like video conferencing, where you can see video, you can hear audio, you're talking about work-related projects that might be sensitive in some cases. And then, schools and kids are starting to use these things. So you really do want to make sure that you understand how they work. You can lock them down, you can configure them appropriately. And when things do happen, that the company that produces the product is doing what they need to do to protect you. And if they're not, then move on. So there's a lot of fear in the world right now. And that's not news to anybody. There's healthcare related fear. People are worried about getting sick. There's economic fear. People are losing their jobs. If you have a job, then maybe a lot of your customers have started to dry up. Maybe you're worried about what will happen in a month from now. Maybe you're worried about how long the recovery will take. And attackers know this. And these kinds of situations, although they're extremely difficult for most of us to go through, they are seen as an opportunity for the kinds of people and organizations who are looking to compromise your accounts and get access to your corporate resources and send phishing emails and all of those kinds of things, because they know that if they can tap into a little bit of that fear, people are going to be more likely to interact with things that in other situations they might not interact with. So Ahren mentioned that we're seeing a lot more phishing activity, a lot of it related to coronavirus and COVID-19 related terms. All of these domains are being registered. You can see it off in the image here to the right. This is a GoDaddy search page where you can go say, I want to buy this domain, and they'll let you know if it's available or not. And this one, COVID-19 stimuluscheck.com, was taken. And we, as a part of this presentation and the demo we're going to show, we did register a phishing domain related to COVID-19 and coronavirus stimulus checks. And it took us a long while to find one that we could actually register because so many of them were taken. Or if we did find one, it was like, $20,000 to register it or something like that, because the market was pretty competitive for them. Now, full disclosure, they're not all malicious. Some of them are legitimately registered for lots of different reasons, but at least some of them are malicious, right? So these are being exploited to try to take advantage of the fear and uncertainty that people have about their health and about their finances as things move forward. That's just one example. Another is, devices. So people start to work from home, they're going to need things to facilitate that process. One of them is a good webcam. And if you have looked for a webcam, like a well-known brand recently, then they're not available or they're much more expensive than they normally are. So then you start to look, well, what are the other ones that I can get? And there are lots of these cheap ones available. Some of these are ridiculous, like a cent and then $15 for shipping. But even ones that are $10 or $20, I look at them and I think, why is this webcam $10? And why can't I look at the listing and figure out who actually made it? There's no real brand associated with this. And most of this is just vendors that are saying, hey, people are going to be working from home. There's going to be a run on webcams. Let's start producing the cheapest ones that we possibly can and sell as many of them as we can. That's by and large most of them. But one of the things that I really love about working in security is that you get to get your evil juices flowing without actually being evil or getting in trouble for them. So what I would do is I would create a cheap device with some embedded malware that people purchase, and then, you know, they install them and you get access to some networks, and then over time you go and see what you have access to. And people need webcams and they need lots of other things like monitors and, you know, setting up home offices and things like that. But that's something you have to think about when you're out there purchasing these things and saying, well, I can't get the Logitech because it's $250 now, so let me buy this one that's $20. It's like, well, what are you actually purchasing and what is that thing actually going to be doing in your environment? And unless you can rip it apart and figure out what the boards are actually doing and, you know, capture traffic and all of that stuff, I personally would just generally recommend sticking to brands that you know, even if it's a little bit more expensive, which sounds like, you know, kind of foolish advice, because a lot of people are hurting for funds right now, and a lot of organizations, you know, are right up against the edge. So having to expense some of this stuff is troublesome, but there are trade-offs, and you at least have to understand that there are potential risks associated with some of the cheaper things, not only just because there's a malicious opportunity there, but also because they probably didn't have the same level of testing and expertise that was put into building them. So there might be some accidental vulnerabilities that are associated with these devices. So when you can, just stick with the well-known brands, with companies that you know and recognize, because over time, the likelihood that those devices are going to be maliciously compromised is significantly lower. And then just like we talked about with Zoom and video conferencing, Logitech and other brands are certainly going to have their issues, but they're much more likely to take care of them than the $4 webcam that you found on Amazon and can't find a brand name or anything like that.
Cool. Thank you, Jason. So the next step here, we were actually going to simulate a phishing attack and you know, walk through some of the things that an attacker could do once they have access to the network. We're not going to be, you know, super deep, super technical, but you know, if there are questions, you know, I'm happy to go back and dig deeper into things. But let's go ahead and get started. Just bring up my machine here. So to start, I will outline, I have three machines here. I have my attacker machine, which is a Kali Linux machine. It's just got a bunch of built-in offensive tools. Over here, I have my victim machine. This is just a Windows 10. And then over here, I have a corporate example. So this machine is currently locked, but basically this is the remote worker and this is the corporate resource in this example. So the first thing I'm going to do over on my attacker machine is just get a listener ready. And basically what this means is that if a victim were to click on a malicious executable, they would then connect back into my computer, and the attacker here would have, you know, access to things. So let's look at that phishing example. Jason mentioned earlier that we had taken the time to buy a domain. The real government website right here for the non-filer form. Actually, you know, let me circle back a little bit. Right now, then, the only people I believe who have received their stimulus checks are those who have filed electronically and gotten their their tax returns as a direct deposit. The government doesn't, have immediate account information for deposit for other folks who haven't already given their information. So they've created a non-filers form. This is the official government site here at freefilableforms.com. Say that 5 times fast. It looks not so believable. First thing that jumps out at me is it's a .com as opposed to a .gov. There's no immediate reference to IRS or the government in the domain itself. It doesn't feel right to me. But it is, and this is the form that they're asking you to fill out here. Basically, you would create your account, you would enter in your information, and then you would work through the eligibility process to be able to get your stimulus check. What we did was we cloned this website, made some alterations, and bought coronavirus-stimuluscheck.com. It looks very similar. The changes that we made were basically to ask for questions that a user might not have the answer to immediately. So some of those questions would be, average 2018-19 adjusted gross income, tax withheld, your employer identification number, all the rest of this. And if I saw this as a user, I would be a little overwhelmed. I wouldn't quite know how to get through this to get my money. And when people are in a financially vulnerable position, then there's some pressure to figure out what the right answer is. So we went ahead and left this warning here of important. If you don't know this information or want to receive expedited filing, please create an account via our Windows or Android app. We've created some pretext here. We've created some urgency because if people actually want their money, they should probably just go ahead and download the app, and it'll walk them through the process, and they'll be able to get their money. So, since I'm running on a Windows machine here, I'm going to click Get it from Microsoft. So this is a generic warning. Any type of executable that you're going to download is going to pop up with this. So we're going to keep this file. It's stimulusregistration.exe. That feels legit. So I'm going to go ahead and click that and wait for my application to open so that I can get my money and can see it's loading, and doesn't look like anything's happened. So
while Ahren gets that part of it set up, I just wanted to take a second and say that we're saying the legitimate site doesn't look so great, and that maybe even in some ways the fake site that we've created looks more believable than the legitimate one because of the corporate logos that are on there for Microsoft and Google. So then what do you do to try to protect yourself in this case? Because it's a secure site. It has the little lock right up there. So it's HTTPS and not HTTP. Neither of these domains are domains that you would really know to trust. So it's not like usa.gov/stimulus check or something like that. So you can't really check those ways. What I would say is that, how did you end up at that site? Was it something that pulled you to it? Did you receive an email or something that said, hey, go to this? And then, it passed a few of your checks, but it still didn't feel great anyway, as opposed to, I went to irs.gov and I started looking through some of the materials that they have there, and I found where the non-filer form is, and then I got to it that way. So if it's something that's being pushed in front of you and you have to go through email or some weird channel to try to get there and you're unsure, maybe just try to find that thing again by going through some official resource that you think should be connected to it. And we'll talk about this again in a little bit, but major news, even though there's all kinds of issues that we could talk about and get into a debate about news media in the US and in the world, for the most part, pick 5 media brands off the top of your head, they're not going to try to send you to phishing pages for the most part. So if you can find a link from one of those places, or the government, or like nonprofits that and respect, and those kinds of things, you are just kind of raising the bar in terms of the likelihood that you're going somewhere that's legitimate, because it's not super difficult to build a phishing site that still passes a lot of the checks, like the HTTPS and the domain and and some of those things. So how did you get there? Pay attention to that.
Exactly. So yeah, we made this as convincing as possible, but again, the phishing email, could have come through with, hey, we noticed that you were a non-filer, check out this form to get your money, something along those lines. So when I said nothing happened, that was a little untrue. While nothing happened visually on the victim machine here, I have actually gotten a connection back into my malicious listener over here. So the first thing that I'm going to do as an attacker here is I'm going to start a keylogger. So I'll run keyscan start. So it started a keystroke sniffer. So over here as my victim, I'm going to open up Notepad. This could be anything. It could be a form online, but I'm just using this as an example. This is secret text. Nobody should know. Burn after reading. So I'm not going to save this or anything. I'm just going to close it out and say, don't save. It's gone away. Back over on my attacker machine here, I'm going to check and see what my keylogger has picked up. And sure enough, this is secret text. Nobody should know. Burn after reading. It even includes, when I held the shift key and things along those lines. If I've backspaced, then it'll show the characters that I've mistyped. It'll show a backspace and then the rest of it. So this is going to gather any text that you input. So I'll just keep this running throughout just to see what else we come up with. This doesn't actually grab clipboard contents. So when we talk about, one of the ways that you can better secure yourself, you could try using a password manager. So this is 1Password, and basically the way that it works is you enter one big, long, complicated master password, and then it saves all of your other passwords from there. So I'm just going to get into that, just to show you guys that that this doesn't, in fact, grab anything off the clipboard. So let's just copy this off. And for those who may not have seen a password manager before, basically it's a way of, so securely, holding on to all of your passwords in a central way. It shows, just, dots instead of the actual password itself. It does a lot of things to obscure, what your password is. You can generate new passwords, so they could be, long and complicated and something that you would never remember, which is actually like best case scenario for a password. But for example, I'm going to copy this off here for the bank details, and I'm going to, paste it over here. And the password there is my dog is the best dog. Again, I'll just close that out.
It has 2 dogs, so there's a little bit of drama there.
And I'm going to go ahead and dump it again, and I'll show. Oh, it grabbed the password that I typed in for the password manager, but it did not grab the clipboard, and that's that's by design here. It's through something else. So some other things that that you can do as an attacker are actually, let me circle back to the clipboard. So I'll show you that it is in fact possible to grab that. So just want to make sure I have the right command there. I think clipboard load. Oh, I just need a space. So load external API, that's just going to give us access to some other things. And I will start clipboard monitor start. Oh, it would help if I had an R. We're doing it live, people. So we've got the clipboard monitor going. I'll go back over here. Again, I'm just going to open up Notepad. I will grab that again, and I'm going to paste that in there. And let's see. Oh. see what it grabbed. And it did, in fact, grab that password right off the clipboard, and it'll hold on to a history. So, 1Password is, there are many password managers, but 1Password will clear your clipboard after a certain amount of time after you initially copy it onto the clipboard. That's just to, try to prevent things like accidentally pasting it in the wrong spot or holding onto it unnecessarily. It'll also clear your clipboard when you relock your password vault. But yeah, with the clipboard monitor running here, then it does in fact grab everything. There are some other things that we can do here with this interpreter shell, and this is basically just an advanced way of getting in and interacting with the system through a program called Metasploit. Let's see what else we can do. So we've got a webcam potentially on this victim machine. Let's see what's there. It looks like we do have a webcam. So let's see what we can see on it. Just take a moment while I type out this command. So basically, I am snapping the webcam on the first interface, the first one listed here, and I'm not going to show it immediately just because this is running at a different permissions level than I would need in order to view the file itself. So I'm going to snap that. It says it got the frame. Then over here, this is in the same directory. It's just got the right permissions to view this. I'm going to use a program called Eye of Gnome, EOG, in order to view it. So this is the file that it created. You'll see this file name here. It says webcam shot saved to. So I'm just viewing it over here. Hit enter. And sure enough, the webcam grabbed a picture here. This is a webcam that's currently sitting on my desk pointed at some of my desk toys, including a GIF with a hard G that I'm not going to get too into as far as the argument there. I think Jason would disagree.
Well, I also got Ahren that Forrest Gump ping pong paddle for Christmas, and he still hasn't opened it. So,
well, it's a display piece, man. So in addition to just grabbing stills from the webcam, we actually have the ability to stream live from the webcam itself. So I'm going to show you how we can do that. So I'll go over here to webcam stream. And you can see it is, it's running, it's doing something here. I'll see if any new files have been created. So in addition to that initial, file that we grabbed that was just the still shot, it's created a new file as well as an HTML document, and that HTML document is referencing this file. But I'm just going to go ahead and open that that HTML document in Firefox, and we'll see what we see here. And sure enough, it is a webcam streaming here. The only indication that I have on my victim machine is that the light on the webcam is on. But other than that, nothing has changed. It's not going to prevent me from browsing the web. It's not going to prevent me from really doing anything. It's just the computer keeps on running as it is. And I have no idea, other than the light indication, that that this webcam is on. So I will close this out now, and I'm going to show you one more thing. I'm going to cancel out that so we're no longer streaming. Let's say I were using my password manager here, and I wanted to see my password. So instead of having it posted into this notepad document, you can actually reveal the password, so I can just see it there. Let's say I needed to type it in on my phone and I needed to see what the password was. I could expose it like that. So we'll go back over here, and I'm going to screenshot. So again, I'm going to use Eye of Gnome to open this up. And sure enough, I have a screenshot here. And that shows the open password vault and the password itself. I also see that there's a remote desktop icon down here. And with this being the time that it is, I assume that they're probably connecting into corporate resources. So from our victim machine here, let's go ahead and open this up again. I'm just going to go ahead and type that in. We see corp user as the user, and I will connect that in. It's going to ask for my password, so I'll copy that in, paste, hit OK, hit yes, and at this point, I'm connected into the corporate computer. So I've now potentially exposed that password through the keylogger. I've exposed the IP. If I were the attacker, I could be running those screenshots on another loop. I could see the IP up there. So even if I hadn't just typed it as the victim, I could see it as the attacker. There are any number of things that could go wrong here. But really, that's most of what we have for our demonstration. There are some other things that we could do as an attacker that I'm not going to demonstrate. We could, stream the screen, but obviously I can't physically be in two places at once, so you wouldn't be able to see the stream while I'm working over here. We could do things like record the microphone. So, if you were worried about, as an attacker, if you were worried about that little light on the webcam, you could just record the audio and see if there are any private conversations being had. This is the modern day, bugging. They don't need to plant a device. They can simply get access to yours through one means or another, and then use it as a tracking device, as a way to monitor your conversations or your activities, or gain a foothold into your corporate environment.
And it actually does count as wiretapping, so don't do it.
Yes. Yeah, and all of this is, it would be super illegal from a real standpoint. This is all in a controlled environment running locally on my machine here, for this example. So please use your powers for good.
Right. Well, now that Ahren sufficiently scared everyone, let's talk about some things that we can do to try to protect ourselves against some of the things that he showed. So he did show some ability to get passwords, but in general, one of the best things that you can do for yourself so that remote resources aren't compromised, like logging into your bank or remote corporate resources in the cloud or your email or the things like that, is you want to use a password manager. And Ahren showed a password manager. The best thing that it allows you to do is set a long random password that you don't know, that it automatically populates for you, and that's it. That way somebody kidnaps you and says they're going to tear off your toenails if you don't tell them the password. I don't know it. And then you hope that they accept that and don't tear off your toenails to prove it. But, if you don't know it, the likelihood that somebody can guess it is probably pretty low. What we see in the real world is that people want to know their passwords off the top of their head. They want them to be things that they feel like are unique to them that other people in the world wouldn't guess. And they do things like, their dog's name or the name of the company. Actually, the name of the company followed by an expletive is one that we see so super often. It's like top 5. But then also things like, the season and the year with some kind of symbol to keep up with what have been traditional password practices in corporate environments. So we guess that a lot, and it's really high value. But if you don't know it and it's 30 characters and random, then nobody's going to be able to guess it or crack it if they download some versions of your password offline. If you can't use a password manager in some cases, then passphrases that are really long are much better than shorter, more complex passwords like Spring 2020 $. So there was this big push from the 80s on to try to increase complexity, use these upper and lower and numbers and symbols, and people really focused in and keyed on that. But really what you want to do is you want to increase length as much as you can. So even though a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away doesn't have any uppers or numbers, and it does have one, well, I guess two symbols if you count the space and the comma in there, it is much more secure than something that is shorter but has more complexity. And that's just math, right? Just because of the number of possibilities, it gets exponentially greater as you increase in length. So you want to emphasize length when you can't use a password manager. There's also something called multi-factor authentication, which if you get push notifications to your phone, or you get an email or a text or a phone call when you try to log into any of your services, it essentially kills password attacks in the sense of guessing or trying to find passwords that have been breached that are listed in other places and maybe for sale on the dark web. Because even if you get that legitimate password and you go to log in, it sends a message to your phone that it must be approved. And it's not that you can't circumvent that. You can. It's much more difficult. And the level of access and sophistication of an attacker has to increase significantly. But so if you can enable multi-factor authentication, certainly on all of your corporate accounts, if you're involved with determining policy or implementation for those things, but even your personal accounts, your bank, Facebook, Amazon, anything that you can possibly enable multi-factor authentication on, do it. And if you aren't super tied to a service and you have a choice between one service that you're using that does not have multi-factor authentication and another service that you could use that does, to me, it's enough to switch to one that does have multi-factor authentication, just because it is an added layer of protection. It's one of the best things that you can do personally for yourself. So patching is something that is a difficult conversation in corporate environments. So it's certainly something that doesn't get talked about in home environments often, but you really do have to try to keep up with it at least a little bit. So let's say that there's a vulnerability in a printer that you're using and it's getting exploited all over the world, and the vendor releases a patch for it. It doesn't matter if you don't apply it, you're still vulnerable to it, right? A lot of these things you can set to automatically patch, and it's great. Set it to automatically patch and update if you can on a lot of these devices. If you can't, then you got to try to do it yourself, or have a trusted resource, whether there's somebody that you work with or somebody that's a friend, or in your family, or an organization that that you have a close relationship with, maybe because you're in a chamber with them or you went to one of their webinars. Just make sure that this happens semi-regularly. You go through and make sure that things are patched. Same kind of thing with configuration. A lot of devices and machines come with insecure defaults, all kinds of things turned on that you're never going to use. One of the best pieces of advice is to just turn off everything that you're not going to use. And if you're not somebody who has done a lot of this kind of thing in the past, it can be daunting and intimidating. So it's the same kind of thing where if you're up for it and you want to, try to take this configuration on yourself, there are resources like NIST and the Center for Internet Security that will show you guidelines for hardening and securing certain devices and applications. But if you have someone that is kind of a trusted advisor, whether you work with them or they're from elsewhere, this is a great use case for them as well. And again, we talked about this early in the presentation, but stick to brands and vendors and sites that you know and trust and that are used by a lot of people. There are lots of work from home tips that are popping up all over the place from sites that you've never heard of. Just don't read them. Read them from places that you know and other people visit. And again, major news, government, well-known private entities are a pretty safe bet. They have their issues, but they're generally not trying to hack you, although we could have conversations about that, but for the most part, you're pretty safe. Don't buy the $10 webcam if you can, if you can avoid it. Buy it from a brand that even if you have to pay a little bit more. The IRS is not going to email you to threaten jail time, and the links from Facebook groups to vaccinate yourself against coronavirus, they're not real. And all you're doing is you're spreading yourself around in places on the internet that, even if a particular one isn't malicious, the more you feed that habit of going to lots of places and not necessarily trusting the source or the place that you're ending up in, eventually it's going to burn you. So just try to stick to really well-known places, sites on the internet and places that you're buying things from, and it will, chop off that bottom third of the most malicious places on the internet, hopefully. And, this is a big one, and there are lots of things that we're going to have to address as a society based on our experience in quarantine and dealing with the pandemic, but I really hope that this becomes one of them. People have to try to do their jobs if they can work from home, and there are lots of things that get in the way of that. And one of them is not having the resources that you need, not understanding how to configure things. You know, there's certainly like a mental health component to it as well. But take more ownership of your employees' experience, even if it's away from the office. Give them the technical help that they need to make sure that their things are secure, that their personal accounts are secure, that their home networks are secure, that they are well informed about what some of the attacks are. And everybody's spread thin, especially for IT teams that are trying to get VPNs up and get people remote access. There's a lot going on, and I get that. But if we could offer more support away from the office, instead of just pretending that, you know, your risk ends at the edge of the office network, which we know isn't real. You know, I hope that this comes about, that people get more support from official corporate employer resources to take care of themselves at home. And that's it. That's all that we have in terms of the presentation component. If anybody has any questions, we're certainly here to field questions now, or, you know, if you think of something later on LinkedIn or Twitter, you can find us on there. We really appreciate the Nashua Chamber and to all of you for coming. And yeah, thanks. We'll see you around.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
I do have one quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah.
We've been getting a couple updates from the New Hampshire Department of Justice on scam alerts, but they're semi-irregular. Is there any news source that you follow for up-to-date alerts of emerging threats?
Yeah, so for one that is great for the general public, it's wanting, right? It'd be great if there was a more palatable and digestible version of what you're talking about for the general public. It's a little bit more of a technical slant, but there's something called the Center for Internet Security, and they do a ton of work on, they leave these honeypots open. And basically what that means is they're just like really attractive machines on the internet for attackers. And they see what's coming in, and they do analysis on a lot of the traffic, and they have, you know, email accounts set up to try to receive a lot of these phishing attempts and scams, as you mentioned, and all of the things that I told you not to do, like, you know, going to the corners of the internet to get work from home tips. They will do it. And they do analysis on the things that they're seeing. So that's the one that I use most often. But there are some local, state, and federal resources as well. It's just, I don't know that I have a great recommendation for one that's palatable to the general public. Ahren, do you have a different recommendation there?
I'm kind of in the same boat. Yeah, unfortunately, I tend to listen to the more technical podcasts. The SANS Internet Storm Center, that's a great resource for it. It's a podcast, comes out every day, a few minutes in the morning, but again, it's definitely geared towards a technical audience. But I would continue to listen to the alerts that you've been receiving. I'm sure that it's all good information, and I'll be sure to check it out as well.
There's a need there. Let's do it. Let's make the things you need to know about scams and phishing for dummies. David, email.
Great.
Make it.
Thank you.
Awesome.
All right, thanks, guys. We're a couple minutes over. Unless anyone else has a pressing question, we did record this, so we will put it on YouTube if there are things that you missed. I already made myself a note to talk to my mom about all of her Facebook sharing, and maybe that needs to be toned down just a little bit
Right.
for the places she's getting the information. But thank you. This was so helpful. We really appreciate your time. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Get out there in the sunshine, and we'll hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.